Welcome, the Lord's chosen. Power doesn't change people. It only exposes who was pretending to be weak. It's strange, isn't it? How the same people who once laughed at your silence now tremble when you speak. How the same hands that pushed you down now fold in prayer, hoping you'll forget what they did. But here's the truth. You didn't just survive what they threw at you, you evolved from it. Every betrayal became fuel, every rejection became data, and every insult became part of your transformation manual. Psychologists say that people fear what they can't control, and nothing is more uncontrollable than a person who no longer needs validation, permission, or applause. You became that person. The version of you that was once easily dismissed is now a force that commands presence without even trying. You walk differently. You speak less but hit harder. You see through manipulation before it even takes shape. That's not arrogance. That's awareness wrapped in quiet thunder. Now they whisper about you like a ghost story. The one who walked through fire and came back with the flame in their hands. You've become the proof that peace after pain is the deadliest form of power. And the irony? The same ones who taught you pain are now praying for your mercy. Life has a twisted sense of humor. It loves turning tables, especially when the meal is called consequences. So sit back, chosen one. You become too dangerous to be messed with, not because you seek revenge, but because your very existence reminds them of what they lost trying to destroy you. Number one, power made you unpredictable, and that's what terrifies them. They once thought they had you all figured out. They studied your weaknesses, predicted your reactions, and believed they could control the rhythm of your every move. But something shifted. You stopped being predictable, and that's when fear crept in. Power became your armor, but not the loud, boastful kind, the silent kind that makes people second-guess their every word around you. You no longer reacted from emotion. You started responding from wisdom. That's what unsettled them the most. People are comfortable with the version of you they can anticipate. They prefer the one who apologizes first, who explains too much, who accepts less to keep the peace. But the moment you evolved beyond that, their comfort collapsed. Suddenly, they didn't know where you stood, and that mystery became their nightmare. Unpredictability is dangerous because it means they can't control the outcome, and control is their oxygen. You took that away. Now every step you take keeps them guessing. Your calmness confuses them. Your confidence disrupts their old power plays. They used to rely on your emotional responses to maintain dominance, but you've become unreadable, a quiet storm that doesn't announce when it's coming, yet changes everything when it arrives. That's true power, when your very presence alters the energy of a room without a single word. It's not that you've become heartless, you've just become strategic. You understand when to speak and when silence says more. You no longer explain your plans because people can't sabotage what they don't understand. That's what truly scares them. Not that you've changed, but that you've mastered the balance between restraint and readiness. They used to think they knew your limits. Now they realize you don't have any. And that realization is the beginning of their fear, because no one knows how to fight what they can't predict, especially when the unpredictable one is no longer playing for survival, but for dominance. Number two, you stopped explaining yourself, and that ended their manipulation. There comes a point where explaining yourself starts to feel like begging for understanding, and that's the day your power begins to leak. You used to do it out of habit, defending your intentions, clarifying your tone, trying to convince people you meant well. But none of that ever changed their opinions. It only fed their control. They knew that as long as you kept explaining, they could twist your words and use them against you. The moment you stopped, everything shifted. You took back the energy that was never respected in the first place. Silence became your protection, not your punishment. You learned that real understanding doesn't need to be chased. People who value truth will see it. Those who don't were never going to, no matter how long you talked. The power they once had over you came from your need to be seen correctly. Once you detached from that, their influence collapsed. They couldn't guilt you, they couldn't gaslight you, and they couldn't draw you into emotional debates just to feed their ego. You learned the sacred skill of saying nothing and letting the truth expose itself without your help. It unsettled them more than anger ever could. They tried to provoke you, push you, corner you, but every time your calmness became a mirror reflecting their own instability. People like that depend on reaction. It's how they measure their worth. When you stopped explaining, you denied them that validation. You became untouchable, not because you fought harder, but because you refused to play their game. Now, every word you don't say carries more weight than the speeches you used to give. They feel your absence louder than your defense ever sounded. And in that silence, they finally meet the truth. Not about who you are, but about who they were when they had your attention. That's the kind of lesson no explanation can ever teach. Number 3, you learned that mercy is a strategy, not a weakness. You learned that forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it's just a quiet declaration that you're done giving people emotional power. You stopped handing out mercy as a way to keep the peace and started using it as a sign of strength. The old you used to forgive to move on. The evolved you forgives to prove that you've already won. It's no longer about being the bigger person. It's about showing that your peace can't be negotiated or disturbed. You realize that mercy given from weakness invites repeat offenses, but mercy given from power commands respect. That's the difference now. Your forgiveness no longer gives access. It doesn't reopen doors or restart cycles. It simply ends them. You've learned to release people without warning, without bitterness, without explanation. Because when you're in control, you don't need closure. Your boundaries are the closure. What used to look like softness is now precision. You know exactly when to hold back, when to stay silent, and when to let time handle what emotion once tried to fix. Your calmness isn't submission, it's strategy. You understand that reacting gives others a role in your story, and you've stopped casting them in scenes they no longer deserve to be in. Mercy in your hands became a power move, a declaration that you don't need revenge to win. You simply need distance. Those who once mistook your kindness for weakness now understand it was composure. They thought they escaped accountability, not realizing that your silence was the verdict. You're no longer forgiving because they deserve it. You're forgiving because you refuse to carry what no longer belongs to you. That's real dominance. When you can look at what once hurt you and feel nothing but clarity. You mastered mercy not to free them, but to free yourself. And in doing so, you reclaimed control over everything they thought they could take. Number 4, they feared you would expose them. Now they're exposing themselves. They always thought they could hide behind masks, but your presence made those masks crack. You didn't have to expose them. They did it to themselves. The truth has a strange way of revealing itself when faced with someone who embodies authenticity. You didn't accuse, you didn't attack, you simply existed, and that was enough to make their lies crumble. The same people who whispered about you now find themselves choking on their own stories, struggling to maintain a version of reality that your existence keeps proving false. You became a living contradiction to their narrative. They built their confidence on falsehoods. But every time you walked into the room, the energy shifted. Their words faltered, their faces tightened, their tone changed. Because deep down, they knew they were standing before someone who couldn't be deceived. They mistook your quietness for ignorance, not realizing it was discernment. You saw through everything, the fake smiles, the performative kindness, the subtle envy disguised as advice. And that terrified them. People who live by lies can't coexist peacefully with someone grounded in truth. Your authenticity stripped away their comfort, and the pressure to keep up appearances started eating them from the inside. That's why they started revealing themselves, in their tone, in their sudden defensiveness, in the way they tried to turn others against you. Their actions betrayed their fear long before their words did. They exposed what they were trying to protect by simply reacting to your honesty. You didn't destroy their reputation. Their own conscience did. You just stood firm in what was real, while their illusions collapsed under their own weight. That's the beauty of truth. It doesn't need an audience. It just needs time. And when the dust settles, everyone sees what you saw from the start, that the ones who tried to make you look like a problem were only projecting the darkness they couldn't hide anymore. Number 5, you mastered the art of disengagement, the ultimate power move. Disengagement is a language only the wise can speak fluently. You mastered it not by becoming cold, but by becoming clear. You finally understood that attention is a currency, and for too long you were spending it on people who only drained your value. They mistook your reactions for interest, your explanations for weakness, and your empathy for access. But the moment you withdrew that energy, they realized too late that their power was never real. It was borrowed from your willingness to care. You stopped arguing with lies. You stopped entertaining manipulation. You stopped trying to fix what didn't want to heal. And in that stillness, something profound happened. Their influence vanished. They had built their confidence on your participation, their relevance on your response. When you gave them nothing, their entire performance lost its audience. There's nothing more terrifying to a manipulator than a person who no longer responds. Silence doesn't just starve their control, it exposes their emptiness. Your disengagement wasn't avoidance, it was evolution. You learned that you don't win every battle by fighting. Sometimes you win by walking away and letting the chaos consume itself. They tried to bait you back into conflict, throwing insults, half-truths, and emotional traps. But you stayed unmoved. You learned that your peace was more valuable than proving a point. And when they couldn't provoke you anymore, their mask began to slip. Now they talk about you to anyone who will listen, trying to rewrite the story, because they can't stand how irrelevant they feel without your energy feeding their drama. What they don't understand is that your absence is the revenge. You didn't have to expose them, you just had to detach. The moment you stopped showing up to their circus, the clowns started arguing among themselves. That's the power of disengagement. It's not about losing interest, it's about mastering control. You didn't just move on, you reclaimed your power by no longer giving them the privilege of reaction. Number 6, you outgrew the arena they built to contain you. They underestimated you by design. They wanted you to stay small, predictable, and manageable, someone who fought only within the limits they set. They built arenas for you, crafted narratives around you, and conditioned you to believe that surviving their chaos was the same as living. Every challenge they gave you was meant to distract you from realizing how much power you actually had. They taught you to fight for crumbs, so you'd never demand the table. But something changed. You stopped fighting where they wanted you to. You stopped proving yourself in battles that no longer deserved your energy. The moment you stepped back and saw the bigger picture, you realized that the entire setup was a trap, a system designed to keep you exhausted, not victorious. They didn't fear your strength. They feared what would happen if you ever redirected it. When you did, their structure began to collapse. The arguments, the competition, the manipulation, none of it worked anymore because you weren't in the same dimension of thought. You evolved past the level where they could reach you. Outgrowing their arena meant you no longer needed validation or victory in spaces too small for your purpose. They mocked your detachment, called it arrogance, but deep down they felt it. The moment you stopped engaging, the game died. They kept swinging at a ghost while you were already building empires elsewhere. It's not that you became untouchable. You just became unreachable to anything beneath your growth. Now they're left in the same arena, fighting shadows and replaying old dramas that once defined you. Their rules don't apply anymore because you stopped playing. You made their world irrelevant by stepping into your own. That's the ultimate shift, when your evolution makes the very battleground that shaped you too small to hold you. They wanted to contain you. Instead, they built the foundation for your escape. Number 7. You turned every wound into a weapon of awareness. You stopped seeing pain as punishment and started treating it as data. Every wound became a lesson that sharpened your perception. You learned to read between words, to sense energy shifts, to catch manipulation before it fully formed. The people who once thought they broke you only trained your awareness. You no longer move from emotion, you move from observation. You became surgical with your trust, selective with your presence, and intentional with your silence. That's what unnerves them. They can no longer confuse you because you've already studied the blueprint of deceit through first-hand experience. Betrayal taught you to listen differently, not just to what people say, but to what they try to hide. You learned that apologies without change are strategies, not sincerity. You learned that some people don't betray you by accident. They do it because your light makes their shadows visible. And instead of seeking revenge, you stored that information like a weapon. You became alert, not bitter, wise, not paranoid. That's the real transformation. When pain doesn't poison you, it refines you. Loss, too, became leverage. You stopped clinging to what left because you understood that absence creates space for alignment. The things and people that walked away taught you more about loyalty than their presence ever did. Every ending rewired your standards. Every disappointment polished your discernment. What others call cold in you is actually clarity. You stopped negotiating your worth in rooms where you had to shrink to be accepted. And those scars, they're not reminders of defeat. They're evidence of resilience. You carry them with quiet pride because they prove something most people never reach: immunity to emotional blackmail. No one can guilt you with your past anymore because you've already faced it and turned it into armor. That's what real strength looks like. Not perfection, but awareness so sharp that pain can't fool you twice. Number 8. Your energy became too expensive for the unworthy. There comes a time when you realize not everyone deserves access to your energy. You used to give freely time, attention, emotion to people who only saw your kindness as a resource to exploit. You poured into empty cups, hoping they'd one day hold value, but they never did. Then something in you shifted. You started treating your energy like currency, and suddenly the whole dynamic changed. You stopped discounting yourself to make others comfortable. You began to understand that access to you is not a right. It's a privilege that must be earned. When you withdrew that open door, some people panicked. They weren't missing you. They were missing the supply. Your attention was their validation, your patience their cover, your compassion their hiding place. Without your energy feeding them, their chaos had nowhere to go. That's when you learned something powerful. Your peace is expensive, and only those who bring value can afford it. You stopped entertaining arguments that went nowhere, conversations that dimmed your spirit, and relationships that only thrived when you were the one giving. Now you measure everything differently. You ask, does this exchange leave me drained or inspired? Does this connection add clarity or confusion? You no longer engage out of obligation or guilt. You engage with intention. That shift alone has filtered out entire crowds. The ones who love the old, accessible version of you now call you distant or selfish. But that's because your growth exposed how one-sided it always was. You've learned that protecting your energy isn't arrogance, it's emotional intelligence. You're not hard to reach. You're simply done lowering your standards for those who refuse to rise. Every word, every presence, every moment now carries a cost, and the unworthy can't pay the price. You've become a luxury they can't afford, not because you changed, but because you finally recognized your true value. Number 9, you don't fight for respect. You radiate it. Respect stopped being something you chased and became something you carried. You no longer needed to convince anyone of your worth because your presence did the talking. The days of trying to prove yourself to people who couldn't see your value are over. You've reached a level where your energy sets the tone before your words even arrive. That's what real authority feels like. Quiet, composed, and effortlessly commanding. You don't raise your voice anymore because your silence already commands attention. This shift didn't happen overnight. It came from disappointment, from being underestimated, from being talked over by those who thought volume meant value. You learned that shouting for respect only gives your power away, so you stopped performing and started embodying. The difference is massive. You no longer need to say, "Respect me," because your boundaries, your discipline, and your focus make that expectation clear without explanation. People sense it. They adjust their tone, their posture, their approach, because your energy announces you before you enter the room. What you've mastered is presence, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and not negotiating it. You don't compete, you don't chase, you don't prove. You exist in alignment with your purpose, and that alone demands respect. The ones who used to test you now tread carefully, not because you've threatened them, but because your composure exposes their insecurity. It's unsettling to face someone who no longer reacts but simply is. True dominance isn't about control, it's about steadiness. It's about walking in truth so firmly that no opinion can shake you. You radiate respect because you live with intention, not emotion. That's why your presence lingers, not from fear, but from impact. People may forget what you said, but they can't forget how your energy made them feel, grounded, aware, and unmistakably in the presence of someone who doesn't demand respect. They define it. Number 10, you realized being misunderstood is the price of mastery. You reach the point where being misunderstood no longer hurts. It just confirms how far you've evolved. You stopped trying to explain your growth to people still trapped in cycles you've already broken free from. They see arrogance where there's actually peace, and distance where there's actually focus. But that's the price of mastery, to walk a path few can follow, to think in ways that threaten the comfort of the ordinary. You learned that it's not your job to make your evolution digestible for those still living on distractions. The truth is, most people only understand what mirrors their own limitations. So when you stopped conforming, they labeled you changed. When you began prioritizing peace over noise, they called you cold. They couldn't see that what looked like detachment was actually discipline. You no longer needed their applause because you realized their approval was never a measure of truth. Validation became irrelevant once you started operating from conviction instead of consensus. Greatness isolates by nature. The higher your awareness, the thinner the air gets. You discovered that not everyone is meant to understand your moves. Some are only meant to witness them. You learned to accept the silence that comes with being ahead, the loneliness that follows being chosen, and the misunderstanding that shadows all those who refuse to settle. It's not rejection, it's refinement. The ones who are meant to meet you at that level will find you in alignment, not explanation. So you stopped over-explaining, stopped defending, stopped translating your growth for people still fluent in limitation. You now move in purpose, not performance. The misunderstood don't argue, they create. They don't justify, they execute. You became proof that mastery requires solitude and evolution demands misinterpretation. You've outgrown the need to be understood, because being misunderstood is the echo of transformation. It means you're no longer speaking the language of average. You've moved on to the dialect of destiny. Number 11, they mistook your transformation for arrogance because it exposed their stagnation. Your transformation was never about proving anyone wrong. It was about finally living in alignment with who you truly are. But the moment you started elevating, people around you began to shift. What you saw as growth, they saw as threat. They labeled your confidence as arrogance because it reminded them of their own complacency. You didn't change into someone superior. You simply stopped settling for mediocrity. And when you did, it exposed just how comfortable they had become with standing still. Growth has a way of holding up a mirror, and not everyone likes what they see. Your progress became their discomfort because it highlighted their excuses. You became living evidence that discipline works, that healing is possible, and that playing small is a choice. But rather than admit that, they tried to shrink you back into the version of yourself that made them feel safe. They used mockery, distance, and judgment, anything to avoid confronting the truth that your evolution made their stagnation undeniable. They called you different, like it was an insult, when in reality it was your deliverance. You no longer entertained conversations rooted in limitation. You stopped tolerating cycles disguised as loyalty. You stopped apologizing for outgrowing what was keeping you average. That's when they began twisting your glow into ego, because accepting your growth meant admitting their own lack of movement. And that's something fragile egos can't do. But you didn't dim yourself to keep the peace this time. You learned that the right people will never feel threatened by your expansion. They'll be inspired by it. You realize that your evolution doesn't need to be explained or defended. Let them call it arrogance if they must. The truth is, your transformation didn't offend them. It awakened what they've been avoiding. And sometimes, your light will feel like judgment to those still hiding in their own shadows. Number 12, you became the mirror they can't bear to look into. You didn't set out to become anyone's mirror, but that's exactly what happened when you started growing beyond what they expected. Your strength started revealing their weakness. Your discipline exposed their excuses. Your evolution highlighted every corner of their denial, and suddenly, the same people who used to speak with authority over you began to avoid eye contact. It's not because you became intimidating. It's because being around you forces them to see the truth they've spent years running from. People are comfortable when they can pity you, advise you, or control you. It gives them a sense of superiority, but the moment you broke free from that role, they lost their power dynamic. Your rise turned their comfort into exposure. They can't bear to look at you now because you stand as living evidence that they could have changed too, but chose not to. Your progress isn't an insult. It's just proof of what's possible when someone refuses to stay stuck. Yet to those still stagnant, proof feels like humiliation. They try to distance themselves, gossip, or minimize your achievements, pretending you've changed. But what really changed is the reflection. They no longer see someone beneath them. They see someone who surpassed the limits they thought were unbreakable. Your presence now speaks louder than any argument ever could. It doesn't criticize, it just shows. And that showing is unbearable to those who'd rather stay blind than confront their own reflection. You became a mirror that exposes truth without saying a word. Your growth made them face the version of themselves they were too afraid to become. That's why they resent you. Not because you wronged them, but because your strength reveals their avoidance. You stopped being their project and became their reminder. Every time they see you, they don't just see who you are. They see everything they could have been if they'd had your courage. Number 13. You're not seeking revenge. You're letting karma do its job efficiently. You no longer crave revenge because you've seen what happens when truth is left to time. It always exposes everything. You've learned that forcing payback only delays the natural order of things. The people who tried to hurt you wanted a reaction, a fight, a scene, but you gave them nothing. You understood that silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. You handed the situation over to the universe, knowing it doesn't miss. The same energy they sent your way is now returning to them, multiplied and tailored, and you didn't have to lift a finger. You just had to stay still long enough to watch balance restore itself. There's a special kind of peace that comes when you stop chasing justice and start trusting alignment. You realize that revenge is noisy, but karma is quiet and precise. It doesn't announce itself. It just arrives, right on time. The people who lied on you, used you, or betrayed you now find themselves tangled in the very web they spun for others. They thought they got away with it because nothing happened immediately, but karma doesn't rush. It studies first. It waits for the right moment when they've built their illusion high enough for the fall to really hurt. You're not bitter anymore. You've outgrown the need to prove who was right or wrong. You simply moved forward, focused on becoming everything they said you couldn't be. That's how you won, by not letting their actions dictate your path. You became living proof that revenge is redundant when karma is real. The universe has a perfect memory, and you've learned to let it work on your behalf. Now, as justice unfolds with that slow, surgical precision, all you do is observe in peace. No gloating, no hate, just quiet acknowledgement that life never forgets. You didn't need to make them pay. You just needed to stop showing up, and the universe did the rest. Number 14, you became the lesson they never wanted to learn. You didn't plan to become their lesson. You simply became it by surviving everything they thought would destroy you. Every lie, every betrayal, every attempt to humiliate you turned into a mirror they now have to face. You were never their enemy. You were their test. And they failed it. They thought they could break your spirit and still walk away untouched. But life has a way of grading people on the outcomes they try to control. Every act of cruelty they sent your way became part of the syllabus of their own downfall. They underestimated how divine order works. The same energy they used to try and sabotage you circled back to teach them humility. You didn't have to wish for their karma. You became the reminder that it always arrives. When they see your strength, they see their weakness. When they see your growth, they're confronted with the truth that all their efforts only accelerated your evolution. You became what they never expected. Proof that resilience always outruns revenge. Now, every time they hear your name or see your success, it stings differently. Not because they still hate you, but because they finally understand the role they played in building the very person they tried to destroy. That's the irony. Their betrayal was the construction site for your greatness. Their rejection was the foundation for your independence. Their lies became the light that guided your discernment. You turned their darkness into your direction. They call it coincidence. You call it alignment. The universe has turned the tables so precisely that their only teacher now is regret. You've moved on, not victorious out of vengeance, but peaceful out of purpose. They're left studying the very pain they created, realizing too late that you weren't their downfall, their own choices were. You simply became the living lesson they never wanted to learn but can never escape. Everything they tried to use against you became the very force that built you. Every betrayal refined your awareness. Every loss sharpened your focus, and every rejection redirected you toward your purpose. You stopped fighting for recognition and started walking in revelation. The version of you that once sought approval has been replaced by someone who moves with certainty, discipline, and divine alignment. You didn't just rise, you transformed. And that transformation shook the same people who once swore you'd never recover. Now your existence alone is the message. You became the closure they'll never receive, the karma they never expected, and the living reminder that no weapon formed against you was ever strong enough to stop destiny. They tried to write your ending, but all they did was provide the ink for your rebirth. You outgrew their narratives, dismantled their illusions, and turned every wound into wisdom. That's not luck. That's divine order unfolding exactly as it should. So stand firm in your truth. You've proven that power isn't in noise. It's in restraint. It's not in revenge. It's in evolution. And the greatest victory of all is realizing you never needed validation from those who tried to dim your light. You became everything they said you couldn't. And now the same energy that once tried to break you quietly respects what it couldn't destroy. If this message spoke to your spirit, make sure to like, comment, and share this video so others can feel the same fire. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful insights like this, because your growth deserves to be fed, not forgotten. Keep rising, keep evolving, and never apologize for becoming too powerful to be controlled. Stay blessed always.